Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hi guys, and welcome back to Bouncing Back. I am your host Joanna, and I am super excited for today's episode because we're going to be taking a deep dive into unpacking something pretty deep, but also a really important topic, which is emotional abuse. But more specifically, we will be trying to navigate the complexities of emotional blindness in relationships. I know it might sound confusing and heavy, but we are in safe hands as I'm joined by Holly Jade to help us understand today's topic. Holly is a counselor and holistic healing practitioner promoting mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. Hi, Holly. How are you today?
Good. Thanks, Joanna. It's so great to be on the podcast today. Thank you.
That's okay. It's amazing to have you here with us. Would you like to introduce yourself with a bit more about who you are and what it is you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I've been in the healing industry, I guess, since about 2008 and different, parts of my life journey, I guess, took me to this point. So started as a social worker, moved into counselling and holistic healing modalities like yoga and meditation and some different things. So I take, I guess, a holistic and a spiritual approach to my practice too, but always work where the client's at. And I guess I tend to specialise more in emotions and trauma healing, which is why I'm super apt to be on the podcast to talk about this topic today.
Yeah, amazing. I can already feel myself about to go on a tangent with this, and I mentioned this before to you, but I feel like we're going to really unearth something great because things like this need more conversation around them, which I'm sure you can agree with as well.
Definitely agree with you.
Amazing. So I'd love to start off with understanding what emotional healing is. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about that?
Mm. Wow, it's pretty broad because I guess, our emotions are at the crux of everything, and understanding our emotions really help us understand who we are. And a lot of our emotions always also illusions as well. So we can cling to emotions, we can sometimes feel that they're our identity as well. So it's really important to be able to observe them, but also understand them. And it helps us more deeply understand ourselves. And then once we do that, I guess we have less projections and, it's always about looking back towards ourselves to understand. But emotional healing is massive because I guess whatever we go through in life brings up emotion too. We're human, we have feelings. So understanding those feelings and knowing how to navigate them as best as we can is always a great thing. Helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I think that'll set up today's episode really well. But I'd first love to start with just getting to know you a bit more. Is there a book or a movie that, you could tell people about that you're interested in or you've been watching or reading?
Oh, look, I chop and change a lot. I guess, like most humans, we have different elements to us. But, I'm kind of into spiritual sacred texts at the moment, which might not be a bit too deep for today. But I thought I brought this one along, if you can see it, but The Secret Language of Your Body by Ina Segal.
Okay.
It's a really great one in terms of understanding emotions and connecting to the body and understanding, mind-body connection. So I think that's always a great one that I often refer to and often refer clients to if they want to start to do some more self-inquiry. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. I find self-help books are also really great. I don't read enough of them, but I think that's a really good one to put out there.
Yeah,
And
no.
are you a podcast person at all? I actually know that you might be a bit of a podcast pro because you've got your own. So would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Sure, I'm sure I'm a pro, but look, I set up my podcast, Holistic Healing Space, I think about a year ago now. And I haven't honestly put a lot of energy into it the last couple of months. I've just been preoccupied with other things. But I think podcasts are just a great platform to, share knowledge, and people seem to love to listen to them. You can listen to them anywhere. There's some great podcasts out there, yours included, of course. I think it's great to connect with people this way as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Is there something that you're listening to right now at all?
Oh, I chop and change a lot. No, I mean, I guess for me, if anything, I come across anything about emotions and trauma healing, I guess that's kind of what I gravitate towards, or psychosocial stuff. But yeah, I think, Gabor Mate is still on my radar a lot at the moment in terms of trauma, and an holistic psychologist. If she has interviews, I like to listen to her too. I feel like I resonate with her work a lot as well.
Yeah, amazing. And my next one for you is if you've got a famous role model or someone that you look up to in your life, maybe?
Oh, that's a really new. When I saw that question, I was like, oh, that's a tough one, because I feel like that changes a lot too. At the moment, I'm going back to all really ancient stuff, and I've been looking a lot into Imam Ali. I don't know if you've heard of him, but I think he died in like 600 BC. So not many people probably talk
Oh,
about him, but
yeah.
it's what I find is a lot of his quotes and his ideologies we have used throughout our history and today. And, so far back, if we go back in time, a lot of that wisdom's there. So I find him really fascinating at the moment. And that was a long time ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I personally haven't heard about him before, but ancient history and people who lived in those times is something that I'm into. So I definitely will have a look at that one.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, awesome. I would also love to ask you about if there's like a course you've completed that, is interesting or something you held on to.
Oh, look, I've completed so many, and I feel like each course almost led to the next course. And I think kind of that's my life journey in a way. One thing leads to the next. And I think my foundation was always, becoming a social worker back in, I think, 2005, so a long time ago. But from there, I wanted to go deeper into different aspects and avenues. So I feel like all the courses I've completed have been amazing and have given me something. I don't know what's next, but right now it's almost as if I'm just wanting to bring all of those courses together and, of course, integrate them into life and help people. So no study at the moment, more my own, I guess, self-study and more kind of sacred spiritual texts, which I feel like go well with my approach as well anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Really reinforcing what you do as a career as well. So that's amazing. Awesome. So let's jump straight into our interview questions for today. My first one for you is, why is resilience important in our life?
Well, I think we can all agree that we can't escape, problems in life. I think that we're always going to get thrown things, and most of us have experienced trauma or abuse or emotional breakdown or accidents or illness. There's so many things that life throws at us. So, and I believe that we can build our resilience through these experiences if we choose to. So, it's so important for us to have that resilience and know that we can build on it through our life experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think that being resilient means being immune to stresses and adversity in our life?
I think we can definitely develop more of an immunity, but we're human, we feel pain and we get hurt. And I think that that's just part of being human. And I think it's important for us to know that, our emotions are going to arise to pass away. So we might not have an immunity as such, but we'll develop better tools and understanding of how to deal with issues that arise in our life. So it can be something that we develop, I believe. But look, some people who are, spiritual masters may look at that differently. And I think, life is, a lot of us, if we choose to look at it that way, there's always a lesson or a message or a learning or a purpose to what we go through, which helps us to build that resilience.
Yeah, awesome. And I think I love what you said about like emotions arise to die in our life. Is that right? Yeah, could you talk a bit more about that? I think that's a really interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us unconsciously, I know I used to, cling to emotions and, we can get so attached to them. And what really, when they arise, they really just want to be recognized and acknowledged and then let go of, and that's, I guess we'll talk about through the podcast about emotional suppression and how that affects us. So, I think sometimes a lot of us fear feeling our emotions. So it's really important that we realize that there's nothing to really fear. We just need to acknowledge them and observe them and allow them to flow through us. And they can feel really real. Let's face it, they can feel like a real part of our identity or like a skin, but we need to know that we can shed that skin and keep kind of moving forward.
Yeah, amazing. And how would you define emotional blindness then?
Well, I think in a nutshell, it's really about not knowing how you feel, but it's also kind of not being able to interpret or recognize or identify your emotions, and also identify somebody else's. And there's levels to that as well. I mean, some people with emotional blindness, they can usually identify basic emotions, but they might struggle with more complex emotions.
Hmm. And like, why would you think that people struggle to identify emotions in themselves or even in others?
I guess the other thing with emotional blindness is, there's a lot of talk about nature versus nurture as well. So on the nature side, I guess, of course, there could be neurological concerns, brain injury. Many autistic people can also have an inability to express emotions or have emotional blindness to a level. And also personality disorders and people with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, they can often have similar things. But in terms of the nurture side, that's where we talk about childhood trauma, traumatic experiences, PTSD, because, these PTSD, by the way, can actually cause issues with brain functioning. So we have to be really careful when we talk about the nature versus nurture, because sometimes they can get quite blurry, if that makes sense. So I find it's really important to explore, where the blindness does come from, because even, some people who come to me might be labeled, might have autism, and there can sometimes be a belief that people with autism might not be able to access their emotions. Now, that's not always true, so we have to really look at what's causing this emotional blindness. Is it nature or nurture? Is it actually a neurological disorder? Or is it an injury to the brain? Or is it trauma, trapped trauma or suppressed emotion that we've disassociated from? That if we learn to delve deeper, we can actually access that emotional capacity again. And I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, amazing. And what do you think the role of our resilience is in coping with emotional blindness?
Um, so so when you're with somebody who has emotional blindness, is that what you're referring to?
Um, yeah, it could be if you've like identified that you're not so good at identifying emotions, or yeah, even if you're with someone that has emotional blindness.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting on both sides, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
Um, Look, I guess let's start with. I guess it follows on from what I was just saying. I think that if you know somebody who seems to have some emotional blindness ways of being, or alexithymia, I guess is another word for it. It's really important to, I guess, acknowledge that it's not your fault that they can't read your emotions or read their own, because I think sometimes we can confuse abuse with an inability or their lack of capacity to actually read emotions. So I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes if we project our emotions onto others because we're blind, if we're emotionally blind and we can't see that we're projecting, we can unconsciously or unintentionally hurt the other person. And we can label that as emotional abuse or psychological abuse. But if it's an unconscious thing, is it really? So I think for the other person, being resilient, it helps to have that knowledge, to have that understanding that it's not really about you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think having that awareness of like you said, if someone is going through that or not, which is important as well. But so
Yeah.
what would the signs of emotional abuse be then?
If somebody's being abusive towards you,
Yeah,
look, that's a really deep one, actually.
yeah,
It's usually, it's usually more of, abuse as such as more of an intentionally hurting somebody by gaslighting, emotional manipulation, coercion, control, humiliation. Oh, there's so many. What else have we got here? We've got, backbiting, backstabbing, putting people down, rejection, abandonment. So these are more purposeful ways of abusing somebody, where emotional blindness can be a bit different if the person is unaware of what they're doing, and they want to make a change, because there's reasons why we shut down our emotions most of the time. Unless it's a disorder, a neurological disorder, it's a different story. But what I find in my work is a lot of people who have emotional blindness actually have unresolved trauma.
okay. So can people then be emotionally abusive but unintentionally, so they don't know they're actually causing emotional abuse upon someone else?
100%. And often that's a pattern that has been almost passed down or mirrored or absorbed through their caregiver as well. So if they perhaps had a caregiver who was emotionally shut down themselves, or unable to read emotions, or didn't have the capacity, then that person hasn't had a great role model in terms of emotional regulation and emotional health. So they might tend to actually shut down and start to dismiss emotions and gaslight themselves, suppress themselves, and then unintentionally gaslight others or shut others down. So it's a lot about safety. We want to feel safe to express our emotions. And if that person didn't feel safe growing up to express their emotions, perhaps they were punished for expressing their emotions, or they just were invalidated, then it's going to be really hard for them to feel comfortable expressing themselves. And then sometimes a projection occurs. They don't even realize that their pent up emotions they're projecting onto other people until they're made aware of it. And even then, some people don't have the capacity to actually see that for what it is and work on it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this leads on into this idea of childhood trauma, perhaps. So, do you think that dysfunctional parenting or caregiving could affect emotional blindness in people?
I think it's massive. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
really, really big. And the beauty of that is that it can actually be resolved. It can actually be unpacked, but it depends on that person's willingness to unpack it. I find that some clients, we're all different, right? I never like to put anything in a box, but
Yeah.
some clients don't really, they're protecting their parents, or they don't recognize the dysfunction until we speak about it. And then sometimes they shut off, and it's almost like they unconsciously know there's a lot to unpack. So we have to choose that. But I think it's the way that we look at it too, because to me, unpacking those things leads to so much, deeper self-awareness and personal growth. And we can really change those patterns. And when we understand why we are the way we are, I think that's a really amazing thing.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome, like having that self-awareness. And it's so hard though to be able to recognize if you've been through like childhood trauma. Like I think that would require a lot of self-reflection, and yeah, it might even lead to like playing the blame game even, do you
That
think?
is so true. And I think that's normal. I think, in the beginning, that's an emotion that does come up. We tend to blame, and we feel like we're a victim, and why did this happen to me? And now I've got to deal with it. But, at the end of the day, I'm a believer that there's a purpose and a reason behind all of the things that happen to us. Sometimes we don't want to hear it, or we can't see it, and we don't see it till 10 years later. But, eventually we learn so much, and it's a resilience building thing. It's a way for us to, become more resilient and find compassion and forgiveness, because often the person who hurt us was unconscious or in survival mode or didn't have the capacity to unpack their own emotions, or that generation might have had their own trauma. And, let's face it, the older generation didn't do as much self-work. I shouldn't say that, but they didn't have as much capacity. It was more of a survival time, and let's sweep things under the carpet and keep going. And I think in this generation, I think we're looking a lot deeper, and I think that's really amazing.
Yeah, awesome. And how do you think that affects sort of adult relationships, bringing that from your past into the present?
Oh, crazy. I shouldn't say crazy, but in a big way, it's
Yeah.
a lot of couples that come to me, I find it very interesting how our childhood experiences and the beliefs we've absorbed and the perceptions of our reality and our programming and our conditioning, and then you get two people together and wow, there's going to be a lot of unpacking and relationships are probably our greatest spiritual work of all time. They bring up all of those things to dissolve and to dissect, and we have to become more self-aware in a relationship. Otherwise, we're going to really struggle. So,
Yeah, for sure. And time heals as well. So as these things pop up, like obviously you become more aware, but you grow with them as well, I suppose.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. We can heal anything. We're really resilient. We can really heal anything, but I guess we need to choose to look at it that way and find that strength. We're so much stronger than we realize.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But sometimes it's really hard to like convince someone or convince
Totally.
yourself of that when you're like going through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'd love to ask you about this idea or this phrase of love is blind. Do you think there's anything problematic about that?
Yeah. Look, I look at that two ways. I think that,
Mm.
you know, it's hard to I think it's really important to be as self-aware as we can in relationship, but when there's a really strong spark, sometimes, it's hard to really, to stay rational, I guess. But it's also we've got to be kind to ourselves because we all have blind spots. And I think that that's where that phrase is true because, to a level, relationships are a catalyst to unpacking our blind spots. So love kind of is blind until the blindfold's removed, usually by our partner. So, but that's a positive experience because that helps us grow. So, it can be
Yeah.
messy and but very transformative and a really deep awakening process. And yeah, so love is blind to a level, but if we go with awareness of, the fact that, wow, something could really be unpacked in this connection and there's usually always something. I think there's some truth there, but there's a bit of, depends how you look at it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think a part of resilience is also developing this, self-awareness and ability to self-reflect as well. So do you think it's important to have that before you, enter into a relationship, or anything like that?
I mean, I think it's great. And I think we can only be as self-aware as we possibly can be in any given moment. And I think we can always go deeper with that. And life's always going to take us deeper. But if we kind of have that intention or that understanding, that every life experience is kind of trying to teach us something or show us something, then I think it kind of just helps. Well, it makes us see life in a different light.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And my next question's a bit deeper, but how do you think people with alexithymia, that I said that right? Yeah.
Think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I was looking at that word and I wasn't even sure if I was saying it right. But the inability to sort of identify and describe emotions, how would they experience or feel love?
How they experience it, I think, look, that they have feelings, they just struggle to express them and to read them. So, they feel love, of course, but there's often a fear of vulnerability. And that could, go back to the childhood trauma of not feeling safe to express emotions, therefore not having the capacity to to observe and to understand others' emotions because they haven't built that emotional capacity. So that's a struggle. So they tend to be, I guess, a bit more logical, a bit more impersonal and detached. So they might, experience relationships or feel more comfortable in relationships that are more surface level, where there's less need for emotional connection, which, is a little bit sad, but that can change. But I also believe that often people who are emotionally shut off eventually attract people who are emotionally really deep. And it's kind of their journey to actually wake up to that and go, hey, my work is right here. This person has shown me where my sacred wound is, I'd like to say, and this is my work here to heal it. And that's where relationships are beautiful. They help reveal that blind spot to that person and can help them work deeper to attract a deeper level of, or experience a deeper level of love. But, that is their choice as well. We can't rescue or save anyone. They have to actually want to do that work.
Yeah, for sure. And can sort of this, inability to identify emotions or be perceptive to them be confused as like a personality trait, or is that just something more subconscious?
Well, I think they do kind of talk about it as a personality trait. I kind of see it a little bit differently. I mean, the clients I've worked with that have been diagnosed with, emotional blindness or even autism, a lot of it, as I said, has been the result of post-traumatic stress and childhood trauma. So I think it's working slowly with people and helping them to work at their capacity, because I do also believe that if we kind of push people past their capacity too soon, it's too much of a gap. So it's working gently with where they're at, slowly starting to expand their capacity, because if we tread gently with expanding our capacity, all of us, not just people with emotional blindness, we can really expand our awareness. But if we go too hard, too fast, we can often shut down. So that's very much similar for somebody who's been through trauma or PTSD. We have to tread gently, because there's a lot there to unpack that possibly has never been unpacked.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And would it be harder if the person is unaware that they've got something that's sort of inhibiting them from being emotionally aware? So that pacing would be really hard to determine.
Very much so. And that can be difficult. Some people, some people just don't want to change, whether that's a really deep fear that they have, it's, they've suppressed so much that they don't know how to let go. That's where sometimes I do wonder with diagnosis, is there something more in the brain going on there? Is there some damage that has been caused? Because trauma can cause brain damage, so it's a really fine line. And, I have worked with people who do not have the capacity to see outside their patterns and their emotional blindness. It's like they're just walking blindly, and it doesn't matter how many times life tries to slap them in the face or wake them up and try to show them that, hey, they choose to walk the other way. So I find that an interesting one. And it's what I find interesting too is sometimes we label it as narcissism. These people can tend to project their emotions more so on others and be abusive. But it's because of their limited capacity to see that, they come across as narcissistic and can be quite horrible to other people. But it's so unconscious, but it is quite narcissistic, and they often label the other person or their partner as, too emotional and too intense, when really that other person is just more emotionally available, but they don't have that capacity to be emotionally available. So it can get really confusing. And that's where I feel for couples, I guess, in those relationship dynamics, because sometimes you do need to call it quits. So I hate to just be blunt, but it can be really tough to be with somebody who doesn't want to change.
Yeah, for sure. And when you've like worked with people, what have you noticed about like bringing two people who are like opposite ends of like that spectrum, in lack of better words to use?
It's really interesting. I love it when I see an awakening in that person who has been emotionally numb or blind or suppressed, and something clicks. It's like sometimes, that's why I mentioned treading really lightly and slowly, and just I'm always hopeful that something will click. Something will click and something will switch, and they'll start to realize, hey, if I look at this and I work on this, I can improve my relationships. I can improve my level of intimacy, emotional intimacy. I can improve my connections, my ability to relate to myself and others, and expand my awareness. But it really, really depends on, sometimes it really, I feel, depends on where that person's at on their journey too. Sometimes they're just not ready at that point in time. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not in that therapy session that they will wake up to that. Maybe it's 5, 10 years later or 2 weeks later.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you think it normally takes for that something to click in them to make them want to improve their emotional like intimacy and their, availability?
I feel like it's usually, a string of failed relationships or emotional breakdown. Or sometimes it's emotional catharsis, because we can't always suppress our emotions forever. We end up eventually purging somehow, whether that's, sometimes people have these uncontrollable fits of emotion that come out of nowhere. And because they've suppressed them for so long, it can be really intense. Other times people, it manifests as illness. People get really physically unwell because emotions are energy. And if we don't unpack that energy, they manifest in our body as illness. So some people don't wake up. Some people, it just manifests in their body as illness. And I find that's quite sad.
Yeah, I think that is, especially like you mentioned before, if there's been like, for instance, a string of, failed relationships and they still don't realize that, I guess it is pretty sad if they can't come to that awakening. Yeah, for sure. And why do you think people suppress so much or like you said, walk the other way?
I think that a lot of us, I mean, let's be honest, we don't always like facing triggers. Nobody, I don't think, really likes facing triggers. But,
Yeah.
and I think if we're not used to, walking towards those triggers, it can really feel uncomfortable because we're not used to the emotions that come up. And what we need to remember, though, is every trigger is there to be dissolved, and every trigger, there's a truth behind it that is there for us to unpack. And it's like a jewel, really. That's how I try to describe to clients. If we can walk into that trigger, as best we can really transform a lot of stuff. But if this person's never been taught to do that, maybe they were brought up in a family dynamic where people just shoved their feelings under the carpet and played happy families or masked their emotions or were people pleasing and put on a front. And these are all things that make us become emotionally numb if we're not being authentic and we're not being expressive. And if we're not welcomed for our emotional expression, we're not validated, then we'll just walk the other way. And I think a lot of it is the ability to feel safe and to be vulnerable.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you think's the best way for people to learn to overcome these things? Is it through experience or is it through like more self-awareness?
I feel like life's always trying to show us, and I think mindfulness is so important and it's so simple, but so underrated. And I guess I'm a big advocate for that. If we can just, have mindfulness practices, somatic practices, techniques where we, I can talk about that a bit more, but techniques where we connect to the body sensations, trying to unpack or invoke emotion, all these things will help us. But the crux of it is, if we're mindful, life is always trying to bring us opportunities to help us heal. But we don't always, the ego gets in the way. We don't always, we try to control. We think we know better. We
Yeah.
all do it. We're all control freaks to a level. Well, I'm not sure we all are, but I think, we tend to like to be in control, But I think
Yeah.
if we just let go and allow, then that can feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a lot about trusting that life has something in store for us that we aren't aware of that or that we couldn't possibly fathom.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Agree with you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love for you to like unpack those techniques you were talking about as well, if you'd like.
Yeah. I think so. I guess, mindfulness is a big one. Even, someone who's emotionally blind, it's important, I guess, to start to study emotion and invoke emotion. And that could be just as simple as looking at an emotion wheel. Have you ever seen an emotion wheel? You might have looked at your primary school.
I don't think I have. No.
Yeah, most of us can't remember, but it's just a wheel. It's a pretty wheel with colours on it. And it kind of outlines, I can't remember how many, there's over 100, 104, I think, emotions that we experience as humans. And it can be great to, it breaks down the range of emotions. And if we struggle to identify and interpret our emotions, it could be great to look at that wheel and even just, for example, look at shame and try to feel into our body. What does it feel like when I feel shame? Or anger is usually one that most of us can actually access, or joy. And start to look at that wheel and start to, invoke that emotion. And it can help us start to tune into our body. So that's a simple practice that we can look at. I think meditation is amazing. I'm a massive advocate for that because I guess body scanning is a great, simple starting point to really start to connect with body sensations. And if we're, blind or numb, that might be really new to us to even just feel again. So relaxation techniques as well. Just, breathing is such a powerful one too. And it's so simple. Just looking at the quality of our breath. If it's short and it's sharp and it's, in our chest, it kind of, we can link that to our mind, and we kind of, we can know that. I know that, for example, if I'm, breathing short and sharp and quickly, I'm in my mind too much. I'm thinking, I'm in my thoughts, I'm not in my body. So slowing the breath down and breathing deeply and slowly, it switches on our relaxation response. It calms the nervous system, and when the nervous system, when it's relaxed and when it feels safe, we can unpack our trauma. So it's important. Yeah. It's so important to slow down. So practices that, move us more into stillness, and that can be scary if we've had trauma.
Yeah, for sure. I love that whole body and mind thing and how breathing helps a lot as well. I feel like it's so underrated. Some people will be like, take some deep breaths, and you'll be like, that doesn't really work.
It's so true. And I remember years ago thinking the same thing. How's breathing going to help? And I remember doing my yoga training years ago and, learning breathing techniques. And I was like, oh, this is so hard. How do I do this? And, I look back and I was like, I can do it fine now. So it's like practice, practice. But the transformations that occurred in my nervous system and my consciousness through breath work and meditation, I can't even describe. And I mean, I'm sure people out there who've done that agree. And I think with trauma and the nervous system, it's so important to have these somatic practices. I mean, yoga's another great one because if we've had a lot of trauma and we can't sit still in meditation, do something that, that it's a mindful movement where you're still in your body and you're connected to the sensations in your breath. So yoga and movement, they're great. They're amazing tools as well to bring you back into union with yourself.
Yeah, I love that so much, union with yourself. That's a really great way of putting it.
Yeah.
And if we were to run someone through deep breathing right now, how would you run them through that?
Well, okay. Well, look, we'll start really simply. I think to begin with, just being, checking in with your breath every now and then throughout the day, just noticing your breath to start with. Is it shallow? Is it deep? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it all over the place? And then, try not to get anxious about that. It's okay. Sometimes people get anxious about that. But then, if it is, in your chest and it's fast, you have the ability to slow it down, to breathe deeply into your belly and trying to keep the inhalations and the exhalations the same length. So you might like to increase the length of the inhalations and the exhalations to 5 counts or 6 counts, keeping the in-breath and the out-breath even, and making sure that you're sending your breath all the way down into your belly and you're releasing all the air out. So a really nice, smooth, slow, steady breath. And if you do that for a few rounds, you will notice a difference. You will notice a shift. And it's that simple. That simple, as a starting point.
Yeah, I love that. Like, you genuinely don't need anything else other than yourself to be able to do that. So
So
that's really
true.
awesome. Yeah, beautiful. Well, linking all of this back to our relationships, how do you deal with, a friend or a partner who is emotionally abusive, but they might not recognize it because of their emotional blindness?
Yeah, look, that's really interesting. I think if they can't recognize it, I guess it's helping them recognize it, and that can be touchy because, I think as we've said, not everybody's ready to face things, face their shadows, or face what's going on sometimes. So it's being really gentle and compassionate because most of us don't like somebody pointing out our blind spots, but if we look at it in a more positive sense, that it's actually helping us grow and it's constructive. So it's maybe alerting them to the fact that they struggle to be present, they struggle to face triggers or face conflict, or why can't they be more emotionally expressive, or why do they struggle perhaps with your emotions, and maybe introducing them to some somatic tools or therapy to help unpack. Maybe they do have some trauma that they haven't unpacked, having some further investigation for their own well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And what if people just like to deal with things, on their own or in their own head?
Well, that's true too. I mean, there's definitely, like you were saying before, there's lots of, self-development books and, go to a yoga class and start to, sit with yourself in there, or do some self-inquiry, enroll in a mindfulness or meditation course, get a journal. Journaling's great if you like writing, to help unpack or start to, even if you don't know what to write to start with, just start to kind of, sometimes we just kind of need to trigger ourselves to move in a new direction. And I think, a feelings check is great too. Maybe you can just start with waking up every day and naming 3 feelings, like, how am I feeling today? Am I feeling happy, sad, anxious, nervous? Just starting the process of checking in with yourself. These are all things that you can do yourself. And I think the biggest one eventually is sitting in stillness. And I think from a space of stillness, we can learn to relax the nervous system. And when we relax the nervous system, the trauma surfaces anyway. That's when sometimes we might need some intervention if we struggle with that. But then once we learn to sit with that stillness, so much else rises to the surface, and it's a really transformative process. So there are plenty of things you can do on your own if you choose to. Art therapy, music therapy, they all invoke emotion too. There's so many things.
Yeah. No, I love that. There are actually so many options out there, and it's important for people to know that they're not like alone in whatever, emotional struggle they're going through. So that's really
100%.
important. Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. And I know you mentioned before that if like people come together and then they realize that their emotional capacities are not compatible, it's best to just part ways. How can someone, move on after experiencing emotional blindness or emotional abuse in a relationship?
Oh, gee, there's levels to that, and it can be really tough, depending, I guess, on the level of abuse. They say hurt people, right? So it's really about, if you have been, or you feel you've been quite scarred by somebody who's unintentionally thrown their emotions at you or been abusive, it's really understanding that, you didn't deserve that abuse and it was quite unconscious. And I guess, helping you build up that resilience through knowledge that, you can't save or rescue anyone, and that person unfortunately was projecting, and you have to look after yourself. You do have to look after yourself in these situations. I guess in the beginning phase, you obviously often want to help your partner to see their blind spots and hold space and support them. But they have to do that work. We can't unpack anybody else's inner work for them. So, they need to do that. And if they don't, or if they don't want to, or they don't have the capacity, you have to look after yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned before, sometimes that is just about letting go.
Yeah, and that can be tough.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of like moving on, do you think this idea of moving on is different to healing?
Oh, different to healing. Oh, I think it's quite related, actually, in a
Yeah.
sense, because I think, when we have that ability to move on, we are healing, because we're healing, we're able to detach. And because, we all form emotional attachments to people. And it's important for us to know, I guess, when we need to detach for the right reasons. And I think that's quite healing and quite empowering, and a
Yeah.
self-love to a level.
Yeah, for sure. I think this idea of self-love is so important and like so synonymous with talking about healing and moving on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and when it comes to like therapy, for example, as a technique as well, how can that help, an individual or a couple with emotional blindness?
I think for an individual, it's really helpful in terms of helping them perhaps unpack trauma, or helping them, and this can be tough, but helping them see that maybe their upbringing or something in it wasn't as functional as they perceived.
Yeah.
So, gently unpacking that can be helpful. And I think in terms of couples, it's good to have, a fresh perspective or a third party to help them look at, or I guess fostering more compassion and understanding for each other's journeys, perspectives, upbringings, conditioning, programming, why they are the way they are, listening to understand rather than blame and shame. And, so I think that's where therapy has a space, just to be that middle person, because, we can easily turn into the blame game and get triggered. And I guess helping people dissolve those triggers and understand those triggers can be really therapeutic.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think there are any other sort of emerging interventions other than therapy that can help with emotional blindness?
I think there is actually a questionnaire, actually. I think it's the Perth alexithymia questionnaire. I can send it to you guys to pop as a link to the podcast if you like. But that talks about, I think it's like 24 questions, and it can be handy just to look at the positive and negative emotions. You have to take all these questionnaires with a grain of salt, but it can, I guess, help you to delve a bit deeper within yourself, to start to ask those deeper questions. And that can be helpful just to, for more self-inquiry and understanding. And I think, the techniques that we've talked about, the somatic therapies, mindfulness, meditation, feelings checks, and even, I guess, if you're safe with your partner, starting to be, trying to be more emotionally expressive, trying to invoke emotion, but you need to feel safe with that person. If you're, feeling all shut down and just trying to open up, if you've never had before, can be challenging. So feeling safe, I think, is a big one if you're wanting to do that out of therapy.
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, do you have any like general tips you can give people who want to overcome any suffering that they've gone through due to like emotional conflict in a relationship of any sorts?
Emotional tips. I think it's really important to check in with your own emotions and, acknowledge if there's any hurt there, if there's any anger or sadness or grief or frustration or resentment. These are all very common if we've experienced, I guess, emotional abuse, and they're all warranted. And we don't want to play the blame game, but we don't want to ever gaslight our own emotions or dismiss how we feel. So it's important to make sure that you unpack those feelings, emotions in a safe way, whether that's just through having a cry or, punching a pillow, something safe. But, don't ever let those emotions fester. So, I always say to people that, feeling your emotions and letting them flow through you is self-love. It's really, once you allow those emotions to flow through you, things shift. So never suppress how you feel. Everything is valid. And I think once we work through that stage, and then we can start to look at, okay, what have I learned from this experience? What lessons can I take from that relationship? What patterns would I maybe not repeat? What red flags would I notice next time? When would I know to pull back, perhaps when I didn't? Should I have stopped rescuing? Or, starting to really ask yourself what you can learn from that experience so that you can grow, because there's always a positive to every negative if we choose to see it that way, and we can always learn. So, just making sure that you do that self-reflection after perhaps a traumatic or abusive relationship, and making sure that you're okay and you build yourself up again.
Yeah, for sure. I really love that. And I know you're also a big advocate for, finding inner peace. Can that be applied here as well?
Look, definitely. I think that, we're all kind of wanting to find that inner peace, and, life throws us off sometimes, or, often because of, things that come our way. But I feel that, peace is there. And I think that comes with, as we spoke about initially, building resilience and understanding that everything we go through is strengthening us on level, whether it's building our mental capacity, our emotional capacity, our physical capacity, our spiritual capacity. So I think there's almost a piece in that everything we go through is building on our capacity. And I think there's a really beautiful spiritual lesson in that for us.
Yeah, of course. And I think everything we've just talked about is so important, and we've just brought about so much awareness surrounding emotions, because not a lot of people like to talk about their emotions. They might find shame or guilt or embarrassment around it. So I think it's important to create a safe space for that.
100%. Yeah. And I think I actually think that, emotional blindness, there's levels to it. And I think as a society, to a level, we can tend to disassociate a lot. There's so many distractions, and, we can chase dopamine and quick fixes. And it's very easy to, rather than sit with ourselves, to pick up our phone or turn on the TV. So it's important for all of us, I think, to have a practice where we, check in with ourselves, sit with ourselves, have a cup of tea with ourselves, just to have that time to self-reflect and tune in.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's so important. And thank you for adding that. It's been really great. I think we should move into our practices debrief section now. So this is where we'll just ask you a bit more about what you do in your everyday life to apply this. So what is a practice that you do to deal with emotional blindness or anything related to that in your life?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, all of the techniques we've talked about, I've trialed, of course. So I try to practice what I preach as a therapist. But I guess mindfulness, I think, is so important. And, I think that's one that is a priority, being as mindful as we can. Meditation for me is number one. It's a practice that I'm very dedicated to, have been since about, 2015 or so. And that's changed as I've changed. But I feel that it's a really great practice to learn to sit in stillness and to develop that ability to just sit in those periods of discomfort when you don't want to, when you're frustrated, when you're angry, when you want to escape. And it's really interesting to observe how you feel. So I feel like meditation is such a great tool. It's so simple.
For sure. And yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people think of meditation, they're like, oh, sitting in one place trying to access my thoughts. That sounds a bit ridiculous. But
totally.
I think, giving it a try is always important. But then, some people don't find that it is for them or anything like that. So there's
you've
got
to start where you're at. Exactly. If it's a moving meditation, if it's going for a walk and just being mindful, or getting your yoga mat out or dance around the room with your favorite song and just, connecting to yourself, like invoking or feeling your emotion and observing, they're all meditative, as long as it's almost like picking a solo activity where it's just you and you can connect. There's so much magic in that.
Yeah, for sure. I love that dancing around your room bit. I can relate to that. So
Yeah, that's another
whatever
good one.
you do to sort of connect to yourself, that's really great.
Totally. Yeah.
Amazing. And do you find that there are challenges to this? Obviously there are.
Look, definitely. I think we all have days where we're frustrated, we have a low tolerance, or we're agitated. And I find, those days of meditation for me, I can listen to my inner self going, don't do that. Do something else. Don't meditate. And I really watch, that inner dialogue. And I know that they're the days that I need it the most, and then they're the most rewarding eventually. So a lot of it's self-discipline as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And do you find that you set up certain times to do this?
Yeah, I do actually. When I started, it was just, usually in the morning, but I actually, I'm pretty disciplined. I meditate depending on the time that I have, but usually dawn, midday, and dusk, and only for a short amount of time. But it's pretty much a non-negotiable for me now. And this is just it's transformed as I've transformed. But I think when you meditate too, or any meditative practice, you start to go deeper and deeper within, and you become more sensitive to so many things in your reality, and it becomes almost a recharge and a reset and a regroup. And I guess the time that I mentioned, those times have been known for centuries and centuries to be quite powerful energetically, astrologically. So, there's a lot of deeper meanings to that too. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And how would you say like these practices have helped build your resilience?
I think it's really, I used to be terrible at sitting still. If I'd done this podcast with you 15 years ago, I would not be talking about meditation and yoga and all these things, and it's I guess it's just that ability, or that transformation that I know happens, that enables you to slow down and to really understand what happens when you actually are able to cultivate stillness. And it can be really tricky at first if your nervous system hasn't, had that ability just to be still or feel safe. It can be really scary. It can be really, really scary, So it's the more you're able to do that, the more magic, that comes from it. And it sounds silly if you haven't, done these practices before. I remember thinking the same thing. It's just starting slowly. And it's funny, we complicate so much in life, but a lot of the things can be really simple. Often we need to strip things back rather than add things on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for sharing, the way you go through things as well. I know it's sometimes personal, but I think that's really important. So thank you for that.
Welcome. Yeah, I used to, be a bit funny about sharing personal experiences, but I think it's also important for people to hear that we all go through things, and, we all have a different way of healing and approaches as well. So you have to find what works best for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we can lead now into our questions from the audience, which are just going to sort of build upon what we've already talked about. So my first one here is, how can individuals distinguish between healthy emotional dynamics and patterns of emotional abuse in their relationships?
I think if the patterns they're in a loop, they keep continuing, then there's probably something unhealthy in there. I feel like it's so important to have that ability to self-reflect. And we need, you need both parties hopefully to be on board with asking those deeper questions. Why do we keep arguing about the same thing? Or why is there constant conflict about this? Why do you always put me down? Why don't you listen to me? In a more compassionate tone or an understanding tone. But, I always say to couples, there's nothing you can't talk about and there's nothing you can't resolve. So what is blocking you from having that conversation?
Yeah, for sure. And do you think that some things can't be resolved necessarily if it's like a constant cycle?
Look, I think some things aren't. I think sometimes relationships aren't meant to work out long term. we're on different, we're not all on the same journey, or sometimes we meet somebody who helps us unpack a certain level and takes us deeper into our identity, or shows us a new, something new in our life, helps us resolve a trauma, and we go on our way. We're all on a different journey. And I think attachment or detachment is really hard in relationships too. Knowing when to let go can be really hard.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a struggle, but awareness again is like really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also easier said than done, which is
Totally.
what sucks about things like this. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
like we were saying before, like our awareness is constantly deepening. So it's not as if, we can be as aware as we can in every moment, but there's so many things we can't see, until we see them. So
Yeah, and that's what sucks about it as well, because you have to go through it in order to see that, I guess. Someone can tell you about it, but you'll be like, oh, yeah, whatever, won't happen to me. But then it happens and you're like,
it does.
maybe I should have listened.
That's so true. That's so true.
Yeah. But again, like you said, it's all a part of like our journey. So
yeah.
a good way to reinforce it. And my next question is, are there any specific warning signs or red flags from a partner that individuals should be aware of when it comes to emotional abuse in relationships?
Yeah. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you don't want to go into a relationship, looking for red flags or being overly cautious. But in the same way, you've got to be aware again. But it's important to, I guess, I think moving slowly and having like a slow and steady approach is really important. If things are hot and heavy too soon, and sometimes there can be a little bit of danger in that, it's just taking the pace slowly, because humans are very complicated. We have so many layers and levels that it takes a lot of time to get to know somebody. And let's face it, we try to put our best foot forward in relationships initially. We want to be the perfect person, and then sometimes that illusion shatters. But, we all have trauma. We all have, different beliefs and perceptions, and sometimes we are able to accept those and sometimes we are not. So it's really, taking the time to get to know somebody, and are they actively, or are they wanting to work on themselves? Are they on that journey, the same journey as you? I think that's the important one. If you're wanting a relationship that's going to really, I guess, open you up to that spiritual, catapult your spiritual, emotional, mental growth, is that person on that same journey? Do they want to deepen their awareness, or are they just happy, having a more surface level relationship? Do they want to unpack their trauma?
Yeah, for sure. And I think being aware of where the other person is at can help you regulate where you're at as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I think that's all we've got for our questions from the audience, but this leads into our next section, which is the open mic. Did you have anything that you wanted to share with us? It could be anything you're passionate about, or it could even be just what we've been talking about.
Well, yeah, look, I think if you've experienced emotional blindness or emotional abuse, it can, there's different levels. So just, seek resources, seek help. It's important that you, I guess, don't allow it to affect you emotionally for too long. Make sure that you do look after yourself and unpack your own emotions, and know that everybody's on their own journey. You can't save or rescue. You can, try to show somebody their blind spots, but you can't lead them. Lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So, remembering that. I guess, in terms of emotional abuse or psychological abuse, they're all so intertwined as well. We talk about, emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, emotional blindness. They're all quite intertwined, and they're all very related. So, and that's kind of a lot of the work I do. And I think it's actually a lot, it's a lot more rampant than we actually realize. So it's very, very common, and it's something that I think needs more attention. So Yeah, it's everywhere. And it really depends on our level of consciousness as well. A lot of it is just about levels of awareness and consciousness. And we often don't mean to hurt one another. It just happens because of our blind spots.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. And like people go into different relationships, whether that be friendships or romantic relationships, without awareness on everything. So like you learn from all of these experiences. So yeah.
100%. And I think it's important to remember we're always going to be learning till the day we die, you know, and I think we've got to be kind to ourselves. You know, we can only be as aware as we can in every moment. And that is going to keep shifting and shifting and shifting until the day we die. So we just need to, I guess, be at peace with that. And that can be hard sometimes.
Yeah, I think sometimes it is a bit hard to see things in retrospect, like this life isn't just this moment, that it's also the future and it's also the past and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You never know what chapter is going to open up for you next. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, very daunting as well, but interesting nonetheless. Yeah. Amazing. Well, that also brings us to the end of today's episode, but thank you so much for cultivating a safe space where we can talk about topics like this. And I think it's really important because they're sensitive and they can be deep, but I think we gained some beautiful insights on how to cope as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It's been lovely to chat. And I hope that helps a few people out there. And yeah, thanks so much.
That's okay. I'm sure it will for sure. And for those of us who want to find out a bit more about you, where can we go?
Well, I've got a website there that you can look at. It's hollyjade.com. And also I take bookings at counselling in Melbourne as well, face-to-face and online sessions. I've run some online programs as well, some group work around emotional abuse. So, yeah, that's where you can find me. Yeah.
Thank you for that. We've also got Jade's details in the description below. Holly Jade, I apologise.
That's okay.
We've also got Holly's details in the description below. No, it has, for sure. Thank you again. And to everyone listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and we will see you next time. You've been listening to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 life management perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pr.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.